What's that you say? You have some objections. Okay, let's go through them then. The first objection that typically comes up to range voting is that it's difficult to administer as a practical matter. And yes, it's a tiny bit more complicated than simply putting your pebble in your preferred bin, but only a bit. Here's a really simple user interface for a range voting system that I came up with. It consists of exactly two elements, a slider and a button. The name of a candidate is displayed, and you move the slider to your score for that particular candidate. Then you press the button. That's it. I think you can easily imagine how this could translate to either an all-electronic voting system or a system that produces a printout that can be reviewed and verified by the voter before being handed in for tabulation. Okay, so maybe voting user interface isn't that big of a problem. But what about the problem that, since we're now attracting more candidates to a given election, there will be some candidates about which a given voter has no opinion? I mean, your hockey team might love food from Azerbaijan if they tried it, but never having tried it before, they wouldn't know how to vote. There are a few practical solutions to this problem. In real-world elections, for example, it's possible to mandate a certain threshold of signatures before one can get on the ballot, just like it's done today in real elections. By the way, range voting allows for write-in candidates just like today's Caveman voting does. Another solution could be to have a no opinion button in the voting interface, and to establish rules, such as that a candidate cannot have more than some certain number or percentage of no opinion votes in order to win, or that no opinion votes are simply counted as zero. There are slight differences in such implementations, but as studies have shown, in practice they are relatively minor, compared to the overall massive improvements in capturing voters' true preferences that we get by moving away from caveman systems. Okay then, let's consider another objection. Consider an election between orange and green with a grand total of 3 voters. Voter A scores orange 100 and green 90. Voter B scores orange 100 again and green 90 again, so A and B are the same. Voter C scores orange 0, he really doesn't like orange, and he also gives green a 90. So, voters A and B love the orange candidate, and they really like the green candidate. Voter C, however, hates the orange candidate, but he really likes the green candidate as well. In a caveman election, the orange candidate would win, since A and B's 2 votes for their first choice of orange is more than the single green first choice vote coming from C. In a range vote election, however, where overall happiness is maximized, green wins 270 to 200. To answer this, let's go back to our original pizza example. If you remember, pizza wasn't anybody's first choice, yet I think most of us can agree it was the best choice. It was the best choice because it maximized the happiness, that is the voice, the utility, the satisfaction, whatever you want to call it, of the most people. If you accept the idea of overall happiness as the thing that we're trying to maximize in elections, and dump the outdated notion of winner by 1% or even one vote takes all, you'll agree that the range voting result, although perhaps initially counterintuitive, is actually better. Now, I must admit to something though. This 3-voter election of the previous example, orange versus green, is actually pretty much the absolute worst possible theoretical example for range voting. With such a small number of candidates and voters, voters A or B, if they had perfect pre-knowledge of the others' votes, could strategically vote by artificially lessening their votes for green to get orange elected in a range vote. However, and this is a huge however, in real-life elections, as the number of voters and candidates increases to something even remotely realistic, strategic voting like this loses its efficiency, and quickly, as simulation and mathematical analysis shows, a range voting system reverts to one where any attempts at such strategic voting only end up hurting the strategic voter himself. Contrast this with other voting systems that I've discussed today, where the incentive to vote strategically remains high even in real elections. There are a few other objections that can be legitimately raised about range voting. For example, Those of you with a mathematical bent might think about score normalization, where one person might rate their favorite of 50, while another might rank her as 100. These are relatively minor technical objections, and there are a number of ways to solve them, if you indeed think that there are problems. But that discussion is slightly too technical for here. I'll direct you to where you can read more about issues like this at the end of the presentation. The key thing about range voting is that you, as a voter, tell the system exactly how much happiness a given choice will bring you. You have little to no incentive to ever lie in such a system, and so crucially, the system captures not only your first choice, but also the relative weighings between your choices. From an information standpoint, this is actually what helps range voting avoid all of the pitfalls. Some of you may recognize them as what's called Arrow's impossibility theorem pitfalls of other systems. As it turns out, furthermore, range voting is 100% compatible with the U.S. Constitution. There is nothing at all in the U.S. Constitution mandating caveman-style voting. Okay, maybe I've convinced you that range voting is actually a pretty good idea, or at least something worth looking into. However, there's a world of difference between having a good idea and seeing the reform of entrenched real-world caveman voting. This is especially true in the USA, where it seems that the further that you go from my hometown of Philadelphia, the place where the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, the more people tend to forget that the stroke of genius that made the country great in the first place was an acknowledgement of the need for change when better ideas come along. Range voting is a better idea, but it's not going to become reality overnight. In my opinion, the key is to start small. Perhaps you have elections in your school or company where reasonably intelligent people can be convinced to try something new. In order to help range voting grow, I'm going to be working on my rangevote.com website to provide software, web tools, tutorials, and so forth to help you implement range voting locally to at least start the planting of seeds. That also said, my rangevote.com website, at the time that I'm making this presentation, has little on it besides this video. Hey, I gotta start somewhere. If you are interested in learning more about range voting, for the time being, I encourage you to visit the rangevoting.org website. That's rangevoting.org. Rangevoting.org is maintained by a couple of really smart guys who have done a lot to rigorously prove mathematically and through computer simulation how range voting is better. However, for all of their passion, intelligence, and skill, the fine art of making a usable website seems to have escaped them a bit. So I'm hoping my site will be, well, maybe a little less mathematically rigorous, but more understandable. I want to state for the record that I've been thinking about and developing my ideas about range voting for many years now, and I've come to many of the same conclusions as the rangevoting.org guys have. I don't mean to take credit for any of their work here, so I'll just let it be known that in making this presentation, I used many of my own ideas, of course, but I also checked out their site to double-check my own thinking to see if I've missed anything, and to harmonize our terminology a bit. Not totally, but where I thought it would be helpful. This is in pursuit of what I trust is a common cause. I highly recommend that you visit their rangevoting.org website for more information, and also the Wikipedia article on range voting, while at present slightly flawed, is also a good read. Thank you for taking the time to view my presentation, and please remember, don't let imperfections in the current system, however large, keep you from voting on Election Day. Get out there and vote.